The sound of rolling suitcases echoed through Terminal 3 like a slow, mocking drumbeat, each wheel bumping over the tiled floor in rhythm with my father's impatience. "Move faster, Emma," Richard barked, his voice slicing through the crowd with the precision of someone used to being obeyed. "You're holding us up again." The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and overused perfume, that blend of exhaustion and ambition that only airports seem to hold. I adjusted the fraying strap of my old canvas backpack, its weight a quiet reminder of the years I'd carried more than my share. My stepsister Chloe strutted past me, her designer heels clicking on the polished floor like a countdown to my next humiliation. She tossed her platinum hair and smirked, her voice sweet and poisonous. "Maybe she's nervous," she said, glancing at me sideways. "It's probably her first time seeing a plane up close." Richard chuckled, not even pretending to hide his disdain. "She can't even afford economy, Chloe. Don't expect her to know how airports work." Their laughter was sharp enough to cut skin. A few travelers turned to look, some smirked, others looked away, unwilling to witness someone else's public shame. Heat surged through my cheeks, but I said nothing. That silence had become my armor long ago. I stared at the enormous glass windows where sunlight spilled across the gleaming aircraft outside, engines humming like sleeping giants. They were flying first class to New York for a family celebration, a corporate anniversary I helped create years ago, but one I'd been demoted to guest status in. After Richard remarried and Chloe arrived with her perfectly polished smile and her perfectly polished lies, Chloe lifted her boarding pass with a theatrical grin. "First-class boarding, Daddy. We'll have champagne before takeoff." "Enjoy that," I murmured, eyes fixed on the runway. She rolled her eyes. "Don't be bitter, Emma. Some of us just make better life choices." That line hit its mark because it echoed what Richard had said to me 2 years ago, the night I walked out of his company after he gave my design to Chloe, just because she shared his new last name. I could still see his office that night, the gold plaque gleaming behind him as he told me, "Don't be emotional, it's just business." But it wasn't. It was betrayal, dressed as professionalism. I remember posting about it later under a throwaway account on Reddit, in r/Amethy asshole, asking strangers if I was wrong for cutting off my father after years of favoritism and being told I should just be happy for my sister. The comments surprised me. People said things like, "You're not crazy. You're healing." And, "You grew up in a narcissist's playbook." It was one of the first times I realized I wasn't alone. I found Divided by Raised by Narcissists soon after. An online refuge where thousands shared the same wounds disguised as family loyalty. According to one study I read there, nearly 70% of family estrangements stem from favoritism or emotional neglect. I didn't know whether that statistic comforted or haunted me, but it explained everything. Richard snapped his fingers in front of my face, dragging me back to the present. "Do us a favor," he said quietly, eyes narrowing. "Try not to embarrass the family name. People talk." I met his gaze, my pulse steady despite the tremor in my chest. "People always talk, Dad. It's what they say later that matters." His jaw twitched, but before he could reply, the loudspeaker blared, announcing boarding for their flight. They gathered their glossy luggage, the kind that cost more than my monthly rent back when I was still struggling, and headed for the gate. Chloe smirked over her shoulder, the fluorescent lights catching her diamond earrings. "See you in coach if you can afford the ticket." Her laughter trailed behind her like perfume, expensive, empty, suffocating. I watched them walk away, my hands clenched around the handle of my suitcase, nails pressing half-moons into my palms. Travelers rushed past me, families hugging goodbye, businessmen on calls, kids tugging at toy backpacks, but their noise blurred into a low hum. I stood still, staring at the gate until their figures disappeared into the tunnel. The glass reflected my own face back at me. Tired eyes, calm mouth, and a quiet kind of defiance I'd learned to wear like makeup. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed him, a tall man standing near the security line, dark suit, posture too straight to be casual. He wasn't staring exactly, but his gaze lingered just long enough to make my pulse quicken. He had the look of someone who knew more than he should, a faint earpiece glinting in the morning light. I turned slightly, pretending to check my phone, but he didn't move. For a moment, I wondered if Richard had sent someone to make sure I stayed out of trouble. He'd done it before. But something in the man's stillness felt different, purposeful. Before I could think more about it, an announcement crackled overhead, pulling my attention back to the boarding gates. The crowd thinned. I was alone again, except for the faint reflection of that mysterious man still standing there, watching. I exhaled slowly, forcing calm, the way I'd learned in therapy when anxiety clawed its way up my throat. "Breathe, Emma," my therapist had said once during a Zoom session, back when I could barely afford the co-pay. "You don't need their validation to prove your worth." It became a mantra, one I repeated quietly now as the last group boarded. The weight of the past pressed down for a second, memories of every dinner table conversation where I'd been talked over, every family photo where I'd been half-cropped out, every time Richard praised Chloe for achievements she hadn't earned. My therapist once said narcissistic parents train you to believe that being unseen is survival. I used to agree. Now, I wasn't so sure. Because invisibility has a strange advantage, it lets you move in silence until it's time to be seen. And that moment was closer than anyone in Terminal 3 realized. I shifted my grip on my suitcase, glanced toward the window, and then froze as a shadow crossed the floor beside me. Polished boots. A crisp navy uniform. The same man from before now stood just a few feet away, his voice calm, composed, almost reverent. "Miss Carter." The name hit the air like static, formal and sharp. My father's laughter still echoed faintly from the gate, but this was something different. "Yes?" I said cautiously. The officer straightened, eyes steady. "Your jet's ready, ma'am. We'll begin pre-flight whenever you're ready." The words landed like thunder in a silent room. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, as if choreographed, Richard turned around mid-step at the gate entrance, Chloe freezing beside him. Their faces drained of color as the words sank in. Around us, conversations faltered, the air thick with collective disbelief. I blinked once, slowly, and allowed the faintest smile to curve my lips. "Perfect timing," I said, my voice steady, though my heart raced like a storm inside my chest. I was getting tired of standing. Gasps rippled through the nearby crowd as the officer gestured toward a private corridor leading beyond the security barriers. Through the glass, I saw it sleek, gleaming, black and silver against the morning sky, a private jet waiting at the edge of the runway. Richard's expression twisted, confusion giving way to something darker. Fear. Chloe's mouth opened soundlessly. "Jet? Her?" she managed to sputter. The officer nodded, his tone professional but firm. "Yes, ma'am. Miss Carter owns it." The silence that followed was delicious. Heavy. Electric. I met my father's eyes across the terminal, his authority slipping through his fingers like sand. "You were right, Dad," I said softly, stepping forward until my shadow reached his. "I can't afford economy." I paused. Long enough for the next line to hit like a blade. "It's too small for me now." Then I turned, walking toward the waiting officer, as whispers rippled through the terminal. Each step felt lighter, freer, as if every insult they'd ever thrown at me fell away behind me. The sunlight through the glass doors bathed the corridor in gold, the faint roar of engines vibrating beneath the floor. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt unstoppable. But as I reached the doors to the private terminal, I glanced back just once, and for a flicker of a second, I saw that mysterious man again, now speaking quietly into his earpiece, his gaze following me with something that wasn't admiration. It was intent, the kind that said my story wasn't finished yet. The glass doors slid open with a soft hiss, and I stepped into the sunlight, unaware that this was only the beginning of my reckoning. The door of the luxury jet closed behind me with a soft hiss, sealing out the chaos of the airport and replacing it with silence so pure it almost rang in my ears. The cabin smelled of polished leather and espresso, that comforting blend of wealth and calm that always made me think of freedom rather than luxury. Officer Grant, the same man who had addressed me moments earlier, now smiled faintly as he offered a polite nod. "Welcome aboard, Miss Carter," he said, his voice carrying a quiet respect that came not from obligation, but recognition. I sank into a cream-colored seat by the window, the texture soft, almost too soft after years of hard work and cheap chairs. As the engines began to hum, a low vibration under the floor, I let my fingers trace the stitching on the armrest, grounding myself. Outside, the airport shrank in the distance, the glass, the noise, the stairs, all fading beneath the rising hum of power. My phone buzzed in my lap, screen flashing. "Dad." I let it ring once, twice, then pressed answer. His voice was sharp, the same tone he used in boardrooms when he was losing control. "Emma, what kind of joke are you playing?" I smiled faintly, watching the sunlight glint off the wings. "No joke," I said evenly. "I just stopped living by your definition of success." He scoffed. "I asked you to be practical, to take real opportunities. Instead, you ran off chasing fantasies." "Fantasies?" I leaned back, the hum of the engines vibrating through the seat. "You mean the company you said would fail before it began? The one you mocked because I didn't have your investors or your name behind it?" There was a pause, then his voice softened, like he was trying to reach the daughter he'd already lost. "You could have stayed, Emma. You didn't have to walk out." I turned toward the window, watching clouds drift by like slow memories. "You're right," I said quietly. "I didn't have to. I chose to." The silence on his end was heavy, filled with all the words he never said when they would have mattered. I remembered sitting in that same office 2 years ago, my hands shaking as he handed my project binder to Chloe. His words then were clinical, cold. "You'll never make it without me." That line had burned into me, but instead of killing something, it had lit a fire. The engines rumbled deeper, signaling takeoff. I let the memory fade as Grant stepped forward, setting a sleek folder on the table beside me. "Your itinerary, ma'am. Meeting with investors in Manhattan at 3 o'clock. Your security detail will escort you to the summit afterward." "Thank you," I said, flipping open the folder. He hesitated, studying me for a moment. "If I may, Miss Carter, it's not every day someone reclaims everything they've lost." I met his gaze and smiled faintly. "It's not about reclaiming. It's about becoming the person they swore I'd never be." His expression softened, then he nodded and stepped away. As the jet began to taxi, the world outside blurred, and my reflection appeared faintly in the glass, older, steadier, sharper. The woman who once walked out of her father's shadow was now flying over it. I closed my eyes for a second, letting the vibration of the engines pulse through me like a heartbeat. 2 years ago, I'd left with nothing but a second-hand laptop, a credit card on the brink of maxing out, and an idea no one believed in. Horizon Solutions. That name had come to me in the middle of a sleepless night, staring at a cheap ceiling fan in my studio apartment. Back then, I'd spent hours reading Forbes articles about startup survival, memorizing every statistic to prepare for failure before it came. 80% of startups fail within the first year, one headline had read. I'd stared at it, not as a warning, but as a challenge. Every failure was a filter, I'd told myself, separating those who dream from those who persist. The first year nearly broke me, nights coding until sunrise, cold coffee as dinner, the hum of the fridge as my only company. When investors ghosted me, I found solace again in that same online support group, the one for children of narcissists. One post stood out. "Sometimes healing isn't about forgiveness, it's about building something your abuser can't take credit for." I screenshotted that post and kept it pinned to my desktop for months. My therapist, Dr. Rivera, once told me something similar during one of our sessions on Good, self-worth isn't built in applause, it's built in the silence between disappointments. That line had replayed in my mind every time I wanted to give up, every time I stared at a rejection email and wondered if Richard had been right. But now, as the jet lifted gracefully into the air, I knew she'd been right all along. The world below grew smaller, and with it, the version of me that once begged for validation. My phone buzzed again, another message from Richard. Just one word this time. How? I typed back slowly, deliberately. By being everything you thought I couldn't. Then I hit send and turned the phone face down. The jet leveled out, sunlight streaming through the cabin windows, scattering gold across the leather and chrome. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe without the weight of fear pressing against my ribs. Grant returned briefly, offering me a glass of sparkling water. "Media outlets have been calling, ma'am," he said. "They heard you'll be attending the Global Tech Summit tonight. Do you want to make a statement?" I smiled faintly, tracing my finger along the condensation on the glass. "No," I said, "not yet. Let them see for themselves." He nodded and stepped away. And for a moment, the only sound was the steady rhythm of the engines and the soft click of the clock on the wall. I leaned back, eyes half closed, letting the memories play like film reels behind my eyelids. Chloe flaunting the promotion that was supposed to be mine, Richard shaking hands with investors as if he'd built my code himself, and the night I signed my first client contract under Horizon Solutions, my hands trembling as I realized it was real. The company had started as a logistics algorithm, but evolved into something much larger, AI-driven optimization systems that reshaped global transport. The irony wasn't lost on me. Richard's own company now used our tech to function, though he had no idea who owned it. I opened my laptop and scanned through the upcoming itinerary press briefings, investor dinners, keynote appearances. My name appeared on the list of speakers at the Global Tech Summit in Manhattan, highlighted in bold. Richard's company, ironically, was among the sponsors. My chest tightened, not with fear, but anticipation. I wasn't just attending, I was headlining. The seatbelt light flickered off, and I unbuckled, standing to stretch. The scent of espresso lingered as Grant brewed a fresh pot near the small bar. I poured myself a cup, the heat warming my fingers, the bitter aroma grounding me in the present. 80% fail, I whispered to myself, almost smiling, but not me. My reflection in the dark window looked back, stronger, calmer, but also lonelier. Success, I realized, had its own kind of silence, the kind that echoes even in the sky. I checked my messages again, expecting another from Richard, but instead saw one from an unknown number. No name, just text. Asterisk, asterisk. You think you're ready for tonight? You don't know what's waiting. Asterisk, asterisk. My pulse spiked. I frowned, typing back a quick, cautious response. Who is this? But the message vanished before I could hit send. Deleted. A chill rippled down my spine despite the warm cabin. I looked out the window again. The clouds stretched endless and white beneath me, the horizon sharp as a blade. Somewhere below, my past was still burning. Somewhere ahead, Manhattan waited, and something told me that tonight's summit wouldn't just be about business, it would be about reckoning. I set my coffee down, staring at the faint reflection of my own eyes in the glass. "Let's see what you've got," I whispered to the unknown sender as the jet roared toward the skyline that had once rejected me. The jet descended through a curtain of gray clouds, the Manhattan skyline emerging like a mirage, steel, glass, and light, converging into the pulsing heart of ambition. Emma's stomach tightened as the plane dipped lower, the faint tremor of turbulence matching the flutter in her chest. The landing gear thudded into place, and a moment later, the runway rushed up to meet them. A thin sheen of rain glistened on the tarmac, reflecting the flashing airport lights like shards of broken neon. Officer Grant was already waiting near the door, as the engines slowed. "Welcome to New York, Miss Carter," he said with quiet formality. "Your car is ready." The door opened with a hiss, letting in the cold bite of city air, mixed with the faint tang of jet fuel. Emma adjusted her coat, gripping the strap of her worn leather bag, the same one she'd carried since her startup days, now softened by time and sleepless nights. The black car outside gleamed under the drizzle, and as she slid inside, Sophie, her assistant, turned in the front seat, tablet in hand. "Morning traffic was a nightmare," she said briskly. "But we're still on schedule. The Global Tech Summit begins in an hour, and your keynote is the opener." Emma nodded, watching raindrops chase each other down the window. "Any updates on security?" "Standard sweep, but..." Sophie hesitated. Our team flagged a new contact request under your name in the Summit database. No message, just a username. Observer. Could be nothing. But I thought you'd want to know. Emma's pulse quickened. The cryptic text from earlier flashed through her mind. Asterisk. You don't know what's waiting. Asterisk. She forced a calm smile. Keep an eye on it. Outside, Manhattan roared to life, horns, sirens, voices blending into an urban symphony that somehow felt like home. As the car glided past Times Square, the billboards flared with images of technology, innovation, and faces she recognized from old networking events. 2 years ago, she'd been on the other side of that glass, standing in the rain with a broken laptop and $1,000 dream. Now, her own face filled the center screen above the Summit venue, framed by the words, asterisk keynote speaker Emma Carter, founder and CEO, Horizon Solutions. Asterisk Sophie followed her gaze and smiled. Quite the full circle moment, huh? Emma exhaled slowly. Yeah. Feels like stepping into the room I wasn't invited to. The car stopped at the base of the Summit Tower, a sprawling glass structure that shimmered against the gray sky. The moment Emma stepped out, camera flashes exploded, catching the glint of her earrings and the quiet confidence in her stride. Inside, the lobby buzzed with conversation, the soft hum of ambition, the scent of fresh coffee and new money. Banners lined the walls with company logos, each a testament to dreams that either soared or collapsed in this same city. Sophie handed her a badge. Your queue is in 20 minutes. Need anything? Just a moment alone, Emma said. She stepped aside, toward a quiet corner near the tall glass windows, watching rain trace thin lines down the city's reflection. Her chest tightened not from fear, but the memory of what it took to get here. Late nights coding under dim lights, fueled by ramen and Reddit threads from R, divided by entrepreneur stories of people like her who built something from nothing. She remembered one post in particular. When no one believes in you, that's when you have to become the proof. She'd read that line during one of her lowest nights, a cold winter when her heating had failed and her code wouldn't compile. That mantra had become her lifeline. She closed her eyes now, hearing Dr. Rivera's voice from therapy, echoing a trick she'd learned from Brightside. Me. Visualize success until your body believes it's already yours. So she did. She pictured the stage, the crowd, her voice steady and unbroken. The fear that had once ruled her, the fear of being small, unheard, invisible, slowly dissolved, replaced by something colder and sharper. Determination. When she opened her eyes again, her reflection in the glass was not the trembling girl who once begged for permission, it was the woman who no longer needed it. The sound of applause snapped her back. The first segment was ending. It was almost her turn. Sophie appeared again, headset in place. They're ready for you. Emma nodded, slipping the badge around her neck, its weight both symbolic and grounding. As she walked toward the backstage corridor, the air grew cooler, the hum of machinery mixing with muffled music and distant chatter. The stage lights bled through the curtains like sunlight under a door. 5 seconds, a stagehand whispered. Emma stepped forward, heels clicking against the polished floor. The curtain drew back, and light flooded her vision. 1,000 faces stared up from the dim audience, their attention sharp, expectant. She inhaled deeply, the air-conditioned chill brushing her skin, and began. 2 years ago, she said, her voice clear but soft. I was told I didn't belong in this world. That I wasn't smart enough, strong enough, or connected enough to make an impact. But what they didn't tell me was that belonging isn't given, it's built. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Emma continued, her words flowing like a current now. When I started Horizon Solutions, it wasn't out of confidence, it was out of desperation. I was broke, I was ignored, and I was done waiting for permission. I failed more times than I can count. I watched opportunities vanish because I wasn't the right last name in the room. She paused, scanning the crowd. But sometimes, losing everything is the only way to learn what's actually yours. The audience was silent, hanging on her every word. She smiled faintly, the memory of her father's office burning fresh in her mind. My company was built on one idea, that innovation should be about progress, not privilege. And today, I'm proud to say, Horizon Solutions isn't just surviving, it's leading. Applause erupted, rolling across the hall like thunder. Cameras flashed, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to stand still. Then, she saw them. Near the front row, Richard and Chloe. Her father sat stiffly in his tailored suit, face frozen between shock and fury, while Chloe's smirk faltered into disbelief. The look was almost satisfying, like years of silence finally cracking open. Emma's pulse pounded in her ears, but her voice never wavered. "And to those who told me I'd fail," she said, locking eyes with them. "Thank you. You were my best motivation." The applause grew louder, drowning out everything else. But beneath the thunder of approval, Emma caught something, a flash of movement at the back of the hall. A figure standing alone near the exit, watching her intently. Even from this distance, something about the stance felt familiar. The way they tilted their head, the stillness amid the crowd's chaos. Her breath hitched. For a second it was as if the noise vanished, and only that figure existed. The spotlight's edge brushed against them just long enough for her to glimpse a face she hadn't seen in years, someone she thought was gone for good. Her chest tightened, an unspoken question forming in her mind. Was this the surprise hinted at in that message? The audience rose to their feet, applauding wildly. Sophie approached the edge of the stage, gesturing subtly for Emma to step back for photos, but Emma's gaze stayed fixed on that shadow near the door. The figure turned slowly, slipping out into the hallway as the lights dimmed for the next segment. A chill ran through her veins that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Whoever that was, they weren't just watching, they were waiting. And as she stepped off the stage, applause still echoing behind her, Emma knew the night was far from over. The summit might have crowned her triumph, but something darker was stirring beneath the glittering surface of success. Something that connected her past to the storm she was about to walk into. The applause had barely faded when the reception hall doors opened, flooding the space with chatter, music, and the soft clink of champagne glasses. The warmth of the spotlight lingered on Emma's skin, though now it was replaced by the hum of conversation, the shifting tides of admiration, envy, and curiosity that always followed success. She moved through the crowd with practiced composure, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step echoing louder than the last. Sophie stayed close, fielding handshakes and photo requests with quiet efficiency. "They loved you," she whispered, eyes bright. "You owned the room." Emma smiled faintly, but her gaze kept drifting toward the edge of the crowd, where Richard and Chloe stood near the bar, their postures stiff, their eyes locked on her like ghosts from another life. The sight of them felt surreal, like two actors from a play she'd outgrown, suddenly stepping back into the spotlight. She hesitated, heart pounding, before finally making her way toward them. Richard was the first to speak, his voice lower than she remembered, tinged with something unfamiliar regret. "Emma," he said, almost testing the name, as though he hadn't spoken it in years. "I didn't know you were this successful." Emma met his gaze calmly, her expression unreadable. "You never asked?" she replied softly. He exhaled, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I was hard on you. I thought I was pushing you to be strong. I see now I was just afraid." His words hung heavy in the air, swallowed by the murmurs of the crowd and the faint sound of jazz playing through the speakers. Chloe crossed her arms, her tone sharp. "Oh, come on, Dad. She's clearly enjoying this. Don't turn it into a guilt trip." Her eyes flashed toward Emma. "Congratulations, by the way. You finally made yourself the star." Emma didn't flinch. "It was never about being the star, Chloe. It was about not being invisible." For a brief moment, something flickered across Chloe's face. Guilt, maybe even shame, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Richard rubbed a hand over his jaw, looking older than she remembered. "I know I failed you," he said quietly. "I can't change that. But maybe there's a way to start over." Emma felt the words press against her chest, heavy and fragile all at once. Years of silence, resentment, and loneliness condensed into this single moment. She remembered reading a Reddit post once, an AITA thread from someone debating whether to forgive a toxic parent for closure. The top comment had stayed with her. Forgiveness isn't letting them off the hook. It's letting yourself stop holding the rope. She had laughed bitterly at it back then, but now, standing face to face with the man who had doubted her worth, it didn't seem so foolish. The clink of glasses nearby, the murmur of laughter, the shimmer of light against crystal, all of it blurred into white noise. She looked at Richard, then Chloe, and felt the anger that had once consumed her dissolve into something quieter. "You don't need to ask for forgiveness," she said, her tone calm, almost gentle. "I stopped waiting for that a long time ago. What I needed was peace, and I've found it." Richard's eyes glistened, though he blinked it away quickly. "You sound just like your mother," he murmured. She would have been proud. Emma didn't respond. The wound of her mother's absence was still too raw. Even now, Chloe scoffed, taking a sip of champagne. "Peace? You call building an empire revenge?" Emma turned toward her, the light from the chandelier casting gold across her face. "No. Revenge would have been proving you wrong. Peace is not needing to." Chloe looked away, lips trembling slightly. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. The silence between them was thick, punctuated only by the hum of conversation around them. Somewhere nearby, a camera flash went off, capturing the three of them in that fragile tableau, past, present, and what might come next. Sophie reappeared at Emma's side, murmuring, "Press wants a few quotes. Are you ready?" Emma nodded absently, but before she could move, Richard reached out. "Emma, I don't expect you to forget. But if you ever—" "I know," she interrupted gently. "And maybe someday, that'll be enough." She turned away, moving toward the small cluster of journalists gathering near the podium. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the mirrored wall, superimposed against the glittering skyline beyond the windows. The sensation was surreal, like watching her own rebirth. A reporter stepped forward, microphone in hand, her tone warm but probing. "Miss Carter, your story's already trending. Many are calling it a modern parable of resilience. How does it feel to stand here, in front of the same industry that once shut you out?" Emma smiled, her expression serene. "It feels like proof," she said. "Proof that success built from pain doesn't have to stay bitter. It can become something beautiful." The reporter nodded, jotting down notes, then paused, hesitating. "One last thing, our research team noticed something interesting. There's a startup listed under your earliest contracts, one that predates Horizon Solutions. The founder went by the alias E.C. Monroe. That's you, isn't it?" Emma froze. The name hit her like a ghost. E.C. Monroe, her pseudonym during those first desperate months, when she'd sold prototypes anonymously because no one would take her seriously as Richard Carter's rebellious daughter. Only a handful of people ever knew. "Yes," she said slowly, her voice steady but guarded. The journalist tilted her head. "Did you know one of your earliest investors under that alias was Richard Carter Enterprises?" For a second, the room seemed to tilt. The music dimmed, the clinking glasses faded, and all Emma could hear was the low thrum of her heartbeat. "What?" she whispered. The reporter nodded. "It appears your father's firm unknowingly funded your first project. Without that investment, Horizon might never have launched." Richard's voice came from behind her, quiet and astonished. "I had no idea." Emma turned, meeting his eyes. There was no pride or gloating there, just confusion, and maybe a flicker of poetic irony. The man who had told her she'd never make it had, without realizing it, been one of the first to help her begin. She almost laughed, a sound that trembled between disbelief and release. "Maybe that's the universe's sense of humor," she said softly. "Or maybe it's proof that even broken things can still build something whole." Richard looked at her, eyes glistening again, and for the first time in years, there was no judgment in them, only humanity. As the journalists moved on, Sophie leaned close and whispered, "You okay?" Emma exhaled, the tension slipping from her shoulders like a heavy coat. "Yeah," she said, "better than I expected." The crowd continued to swirl around them, handshakes, laughter, champagne bubbles catching light like fleeting stars. Somewhere in the distance, someone was already quoting her speech online, turning her words into inspiration for strangers she'd never meet. And maybe that was the point, not revenge, not validation, but the quiet freedom of knowing she no longer needed either. She glanced toward the window, the city glowing like a constellation of second chances, and thought of something she'd read in a psychology journal once. 50% of people report better mental health after cutting toxic ties. Maybe she was one of them now. The band began to play a softer tune, as the crowd drifted toward the exits. Richard and Chloe lingered at the edge of the room, uncertain, watching her. Emma gave a small nod, not a reconciliation, but an acknowledgement. A final closing of a door that had stayed open too long. The spotlight above her dimmed, but its warmth lingered, wrapping her in a sense of calm she hadn't felt in years. The noise faded, replaced by the soft hum of city lights beyond the glass. She smiled to herself, the corners of her lips curving upward not in triumph, but in peace. The past had finally stopped chasing her. And as she turned to leave, the faint echo of champagne glasses and laughter followed her out into the night, the sound of an ending that felt, at last, like a beginning.